Start the camera. All right, next, the iceberg, the penguins.
Hey.
You are all Fred. Did you identify with Fred? Did you identify with his story and his actions? Did you read it, Sarah? What did you think?
I thought Fred was much more patient than I would have been. I would have been like a crazy loon of like the world is ending on like the side of New York City.
Yeah.
But I appreciated. So I read the article this book is based on, and that was helpful going into it. Not that I don't appreciate the cartoons, but I understood that every person who got on board had a very, very different purpose, and I think it brings back a point of diversity in your team when you create your coalition. You just can't have all these strict people. You have to have them for a reason.
Yes.
Different types of people on your team to be successful. And I think that having that knowledge of where I'm strong but where I'm weak is like the most important thing when going into.
That's a good reflection. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, we had the professor, right? He was analytical. Then you had, what was what was her name? Oh, yeah, no, wasn't on the council. Alice. Alice, you know, and, yep.
Cool kid.
Right. Buddy. No, I think if you took a business school class on high performance leadership, they would probably say something very similar to that, is that you need a diverse team with a lot of different skill sets, and that if you find too many people who have the same skill set as you, then you'll be underrepresented in other areas. So, yep, that holds true. Kevin, what did you think?
So I had started reading this book the day before Trump's announcement on the Paris Agreement.
Okay.
I thought it was a cute way to phrase a couple of key points, but it basically hit on a lot of the same topics that we covered in the last book.
Yeah.
Basically, not a step by step, but how to get people on board, set of urgency, and it was the same steps for the most part, just in a different. I guess is the best way.
Yeah. Yeah.
It pretty much was the same 8-step process.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's written by John Cotter, so I mean, those are his steps, and he just built a story around it.
Well, it's the same as the previous one.
Who Killed Change?
Yes.
Yeah.
Similar.
Yeah.
I think he was trying to illustrate a point too, is that storytelling is so important when communicating concepts.
Yeah.
He was like the 2 books that he wrote, he wrote stories into them, and even inside here, he was talking about how Buddy's such a great storyteller, you know, because communicating a vision is so important, and sometimes if you just say, well, there's a reason for it, people do not listen to you. But if you tell a story and engage their emotions, then.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, he systematically takes us through a theoretical change process, and he tries to create elements that he would suspect you'll find. So somebody has an insight, or someone has a change concept, but they're not in a position of power. And then he has to go about convincing someone who has influence. He has to go about, or they together have to go about forming a coalition. They have to quiet naysayers. They have to do some storytellings to evoke emotion. So, you know, when I read this the first time, I saw a few things in here that seemed familiar to me, things that I had experienced in my career, done in a little bit of a silly, goofy way. And, you know, again, I kind of appreciate all his little jokes about, have a squid, or, you look concerned, have a squid, or it was kind of funny. But, you know, we have our hero, right? His name is Fred, so we're all Freds. This is a class full of Freds. And, one of the early quotes in the book is that Fred was in no position to make any pronouncements or dictate how others act. He was not one of the leaders of the colony, and he had no track record as a credible iceberg forecaster. Right? That's all of us. We talked about power, sources of power. What sources did Fred have at that moment when he discovered this realization? Did he have obviously he didn't have a position of power position. Did he have a power of relationships? Well, he knew Alice, so that was a good start, and that's why he went toward her, but generally speaking, not really. Did he have a power of expertise? No. Did he have power to punish or reward? No. Did he have information? Yes. Did he have charisma? I'd argue seemed like a pretty charismatic little guy. But he knew that he wasn't going to be one who could just jump up on a soapbox and start telling everyone about these key insights and then have everyone follow him. Yeah, Elliot.
You could argue that he had some, not like, I don't know what the word for it is, but he had some trappings that made him seem like he had authority. He had his briefcase.
Okay, yeah.
So he did kind of look like he knew something.
Right? Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, I hadn't thought about that. You're right. So he took a one-on-one conversation with Alice, and now she was chosen for a reason. I suspect she wasn't the only other penguin he knew. He knew lots of people, but why do you think he went and tried to win over Alice?
Said she was known to get stuff done. She had authority.
Yep.
People listen to Alice.
Yep. Yeah.
She was easily approachable.
Yep.
Like, she would not turn down meetings. She would actually listen to him instead
Right.
of just rejecting him outright.
Right. Why do you think he didn't go to was it Louis or Louis, the chief penguin?
Just dismissed him.
Well, I mean, again, when you go up to someone at that top, I mean, you need to have some credibility. You can't just really walk up to someone who is in a position like that and who doesn't know you. It's somewhat unrealistic. So, I mean, in all of your cases, do you know somebody in your company or your organization who is not the president or CEO, but is someone who's maybe close and has a lot of connection and authority? And if something happened, can you think of a person that you would go to instead of maybe the top boss? I think most of us do. Most of us. If I ask you the question, who would you need to talk to in order to get to the CEO? You probably have a good idea of, well, I know this person and they have a good connection to the CEO, so that's probably how I would do it. So I think this is kind of that example. Alice was his sympathetic ear, someone who was open-minded, and implicitly she seems like she was a good change supporter. So there's a reason why he went to Alice. And then after he convinced her, he took her on this fact-finding mission, right? They went and they swam and they found the cave, and she saw with her own eyes. And so then she had to lobby to get Fred to speak at the Leadership Council. So that's good. So she used her power and influence. So if you think about Alice, did she have a power of position? Yeah, she's on the council. Did she have a power of charisma or charm? Yeah, in her own way, probably. Did she have the power of relationships? Yeah, she knew Louis. Power of information? Well, arguably once she hooked up with Fred, she had that information. Expertise? Maybe not. Punishment, reward? Debate. So anyway, but she had much more power than Fred did. So she was an effective ally.
I like that she had some power in regards to No too. Like she could tap him on the shoulder and she would stop talking. Was that him? I think that was him. But yeah.
And I thought it was interesting when Fred was given the opportunity to speak. There's a passage in the book where he says he was tempted to prepare a long presentation with statistics, but instead he said he had a different idea. And so what did he end up doing?
Did he have the bottle?
Not yet.
He built a mini iceberg.
He built a mini iceberg, right? Yeah, he used a visual aid, knowing that would maybe speak to them more than just coming up with a bunch of statistics. So again, Cotter's trying to guide you guys into stepping back from that pure analytical mindset, where it's just about charts and graphs and statistics, and it's more about storytelling. It's more about invoking these emotions. So Fred built it said even though he didn't have opposable thumbs, he made a mini iceberg. And then at that meeting, our favorite character, No steps up and starts giving him some resistance. And so then I thought it was interesting that in the story, Fred and Alice then used some emotional storytelling. They said, what if in the middle of the night this happens and all these little baby penguins are lost? How would you feel if you if you knew that we as a council were if we possessed this information and we had done nothing about it. So even then, as they were confronting No-No, they weren't confronting him based on, depth of the cracks, and that they were using this emotional storytelling component.
I like how they tied that piece into, I think everybody, when you have a problem, you're trying to invoke change, you're never 100% sure that the scenario might unfold the way that you're trying to avoid.
Yeah.
But they tied that in, they really emphasized that, because I think that's a problem that most people probably face.
Yep. Well, it's a little bit like maybe the risk taking that the character in the movie took, right? When he called for that vote with secret ballot. It was a risk. He didn't know how it was going to turn out. It could have backfired on him, but at some point you take a risk, and then usually there's a good payoff if you're right. And so then they thought, let's have a big meeting. Let's call General Assembly. Let's tell everybody what's going on. And then most of the people in the council, most of the penguins said, oh, no, there's going to be a panic. We can't do it. And so then Fred had the idea. He said, well, let's do a little test. I found this thing. No one knew what it was. He pecked his beak at it, and it's harder than ice. So if this cracks, then ice, which is weaker than this, will definitely crack. So they did the test, and sure enough, it cracked. So then they thought, okay, now we feel confident that this isn't business as usual. This is an urgent situation. So this glass bottle that they used was the tool that they really used to build the urgency. And so they have the meeting, right? And they explain the situation to the masses, and they all walk away, and they're all having these little conversations. Oh, do you think the iceberg really is melting? And stop complaining about missing lunch. Think, why does this have to happen? But then the group decides to form this coalition, and they go on they don't call it a team building exercise, but they have basically an offsite, right? And they talk about how they talked about the families, and the professor was very confused. Why are we talking about this family stuff? But again, Cotter's trying to maybe touch on what we talked about in the buses case, that you need to build this coalition. It has to be a team. So this was a non-team. These are just a group of individuals, but they made them into a team. So they had their offsite. Yeah.
This is so there's obviously cultural differences, like say we're doing business in the U.S. versus China.
Mm-hmm.
Does Cotter's principles apply the same way? I mean, is that universal? You always want to, tap into the emotions. You always want to, take time to develop the relationships.
Mm-hmm.
I know that's a really broad question because there's a lot of different cultures, but
yeah.
I didn't know if they were considered universal, or if they were really specific to the U.S.
It is a good question. I don't know the answer. I would assume it's probably specific to a lot of Western cultures. I could see how in others a little bit less consensus driven would be yeah.
I think that, humans are humans, and we build trust based on, you want to know the other person caring about it. So I think in some sense that relationship factor is still important. 2 years ago, I grew up in Malaysia. My dad and my granddad all own businesses in Malaysia. So I went over there, I was asking them for business advice, and they talked about relationships like 90% of the time. They're like, you need to work on those relationships.
Mm-hmm.
It's like people, because if you work with people, you need to build that trust. So to build that trust, you need to build that work on the relationship. So I think there is some sort of universality there because we are working with people. But
yeah, I would think too, so like your point, like how that emotion plays out will probably look different, right? In terms of what unifies people. Like you think the United States really just focus on being like an individual and like pulling yourself up from the bootstraps and like the American dream. I would say that connects to us very much emotionally, but you go to a different country, say China, where it's not as much as individualistic, but more sort of society and your role and other relationships, family relationships, right? So that's going to be sort of a different emotion or a different message, but pulling up those emotions in a similar way.
Yep. Yeah, Kevin.
So, dealing with several teams all over the world, I think for the most part, these all, maybe not in this order, so to speak, for the, you know, the urgency that, but to your point, relationships first. In Latin America, emotion is everything at first. That's like just passion. That's like the biggest thing you can to portray onto somebody else, that you're passionate about the subject, and it kind of rubs off easily. So yeah, I think for the most part, the steps are there. It's just how you use them in what order. Just maybe in Asia, you need credibility before you go emotion.
Yeah, and so I'll have to think about it a little bit more myself. But my first reaction is to say that the steps are probably similar. The framework of the process is probably similar, but I just think you have to adapt your communication and adapt your messaging based a little bit on the organization. And given that if the organization is part of a broader culture, so, you know, for example, like I'm thinking about my German colleagues, like they are not emotional. They do not respond to the sort of, you know, visioning. They're much more analytical, and they in many ways really just want to be told what to do, and then they execute it great. But whenever you try to implore them to take ownership and be part of the two-way process, they say, "Nine, just tell me what to do, you know, and I'll do it." You know, they're a little bit more that empirical, rational framework that we talked about, you know, whereas the Latins are not. You know, the Latin Americans are much more about behavior-based and passion and emotion. So I think it's probably a good framework, but, you know, in every situation you have to adapt it to the culture of the organization and the change readiness of them.
Right.
It's a good question though. I'll have to do some Googling whether Cotter has any. Yeah, and so then after they have this big meeting, they actually do take some one-on-one conversations. If you recall, the coalition goes out and starts talking to people, and people have all sorts of fanciful ideas about making glue out of whale blubber and gluing the ice together and pecking a hole certain, you know, very deep, and it's going to take 5 years. But it was through that process where then someone gives them the advice that maybe they should just be more reflective and look at their environment, do what Fred did, and that's when they see the seagull. And that's when they get the spark and the idea for, they interview the seagull, which I thought was pretty funny. And the seagull tells them about the nomad way of life, moving from location to location. And that's really when this team forms this vision. It was through that interviewing process. And so anyway, we don't need to go through all of it, but, you know, as we got toward the end, it talked a little bit about changing some of these internal processes. I thought there was an interesting bit about how there was just this culture that penguins didn't share their fish with anybody other than their children. And they made a big point of saying how if they have these scouts, the scouts would be hungry, they won't have time to catch their own fish, so the community needed to catch the fish, but this was never done before. So the children at the school came up with this idea to charge a 2-fish admission, which so then the older penguins didn't feel like they actually were catching fish on behalf of someone else, they were just giving fish as an admission fee. Yeah.
I think there's some sort of lesson with persuasion there. Like this tradition is really hardwired into the culture. Like they said it many times. Like this is absolutely like number one, you do not fish for other family. Number two, you do not fish for other family.
Yeah.
And then they use these kids as a symbol that, I mean, they're very influential. Their parents and hey, mom and dad, bring 2 fish, please, please, please.
Yeah.
And as soon as a few family follow along, the peer pressure kind of went along. So this interesting. You can probably think of other like hard traditions in companies and how to persuade those changes. It's really hard.
Yep. Yes, Julie.
The children kind of represent that perspective of newness, that they haven't been indoctrinated with all of this time of seeing something hard and fast be the rule. And I mean, I know my young children will say, oh, like, why do we have to do that? And sometimes it's, well, we do, and sometimes you're like, yeah, that's just a dumb thing we do. We shouldn't do that anymore. And that, I think that happens in companies a lot, where the person who says, we've always done it this way, and the new person who says, why?
Right, right. Absolutely. The first rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about Fight Club. The second rule of Fight Club is you don't talk about, and some of those things are just so hardwired in that you're right. It's probably some of the biggest challenges that we have is to kill those, what do they call them, sacred cows. Those are those things that everyone holds up on high esteem. That no, we don't catch fish for other penguins. Yeah, those are incredibly hard to overcome, and sometimes it takes an outsider or it takes a fresh face to challenge it and make everyone recognize, oh yeah, this is sort of silly. Why do we do it that way? So yeah, that's a good point. And then they made mention that when these scouts go out on the trip and they come back and they all come back safe and they all come back with these stories, then that's a real short-term win. And as you guys know with Cotter, he's really big on celebrate these short-term wins. And these scouts became held up on high regard in the community as heroes, and they went for round 2 and they got even more people. Yeah.
I do have a question, though.
Yeah.
I was really, scared that the scouts would not come back. I have a feeling that it was more like less than a 50-50 chance that they will come back, and it was like I don't know, it's like a really celebratory thing that was low probability. But so, what if the scouts did not come back? The thing is still gonna melt, you know. I know. I was just thinking.
I don't know. What do you guys think? What if 50% got eaten by a sea lion? What do you guys think would have happened? Yeah. That'd be a tough spin. But I think they had to do this.
Yeah.
Right. This was on the verge of the winter. They needed to do it.
Well, how about put it in practical terms? Like, have you had a change project, or have you seen a change project where a short-term win did not happen? Like, how do you capture another short-term win quick enough to catch the momentum rather than just and deal with the additional objections that are coming up?
Well, the only thing I can think of off the top of my head is that, and I'll talk about this change program I led at my company next week, but one of my big things was that I wanted to really quantify the benefit. So each month we created a reporting system where we were literally tracking how much bottom line impact this was having. And I think after the first 3 or 4 months, we were going right on track, and I was submitting these reports, and people were starting to see, oh, okay, this is holding some truth and it's having some effect. And then month 4, month 5, just the way some of the reporting worked out, we took a step backwards, and so now my momentum was lost. And I just remember thinking, oh man, I hate to report this, but I have to now. I'm committed to making these monthly reports. And so then you just try to, well, this is a one-time thing, and we had a couple customer returns, and that affected this number, and so then the calculated number fell down, but this was just a temporary thing. So you try to find ways to mitigate it, but yeah, that was that. I remember that feeling when I saw the number. I remember I made my finance person double check it. Are you sure that's right? And he said, yeah, that's the right number. Ah, damn it. So, but luckily, no one was eaten by a killer whale, so it was nothing so dramatic. But yeah, and then toward the very end of the book, when they're about ready to leave, they have a second scout wave, and Cotter tries to display that as an example of building momentum. That the first time they didn't have quite as many volunteers, they came back and were considered heroes, short-term win, celebration, and then they had to go for a second round of scouting, and this time there were many more volunteers, and he says that they started to hold an even higher place in society. So that became this momentum building thing. So one thing the book didn't really talk about is then the sustaining phase. He covered a lot in 120 pages, so he couldn't make this little fable too long. But you're definitely left with the feeling that the society became change ready, because I think they said after the first year, they had to move again, and it was going to be tempting to say, oh, we just went through this big emotional ordeal, we found this new home, but you know what, we found a better one. It would have been tempting to say, let's just stick with where we are. But this culture became willing to go through the change again, and the second time was probably easier than the first time. So I think he's trying to set you up to understand that once you go through something, the group becomes more accepting of that type of process, and so the number two, the project number 2 becomes a bit easier. What do you guys think overall? Is this a helpful story to use in the context? My question is, would it be better to offer this story early in the course, or is it more impactful that you read it now toward the very end when you've seen all the 8 steps and you've read all these other books? Does it mean more to you to read this book now, or would have this been a nice introduction to the class and said, hey, read this little silly fable now? I'm trying to get some feedback. What do you guys think?
I think now was an okay time. Just like the Who Killed Change, it can be a dry topic. If you were just to list out some of these points, like the key learnings, it would be very dry. But it gives it an animation, if you will, that you can wrap your head around. Yeah. It's easier to remember when you're talking about penguins than if it's just out of textbook.
If you start the class with it, you can use it as an arc.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what I don't know whether it would change things, but I feel like if you had this before, like even when reading the buses case, I was thinking of the penguins the whole time. Yeah. Like comparing the buses with the penguins. Yeah. So as we learned all the different steps, it's nice to compare the penguins. Yeah. Throughout the whole semester. Yeah.
When you were describing the class to me, you told me the title of this. That was like how you described the class. You were like, I read this book. Yeah. That's what this class is on, and so I read it. Yeah. Like, whatever that weekend was.
Right. Right.
And I thought it was a good, like, gentle introduction to like, it's not that scary. Here's a book about penguins.
Yeah, yeah.
Fine. You know, like it was a good, like, ease into it.
Good comment. Yeah, Brian.
I mean, I could see where it's an easy story. It's not that thought intensive. But at the end of the class here, it's nice to be able to go back and like what forms of power they had, like you were breaking down the slide and all that. It's nice to understand the topics. Yeah. And apply them. Like there's actually more to this simple story than. Yeah.
Well, and the reason why I ask is because the last time I had this early in the class, I think it was week 2, they had to read this, and I just didn't get the sense that, I mean, this, as you said, the story was easy to read, it was non-threatening, it quickly became clear some of these learning points, but I didn't get the sense that it was quite as impactful because we hadn't gone through the rest of the class yet. So
yeah, I feel like if you didn't know what to look for and you just read that, I would almost be irritated by how like meaningless it would have sounded. Yeah, because it was borderline annoying to me anyway. So I think I don't know. Well, anyway, I think in the beginning it wouldn't have made as much sense. Whereas now, at least I could look back at some of the other readings and think that actually helped me understand the prior readings even better. Like, okay, they went through this stage, that stage.
Good comments. No, it is a little annoying. I agree.
There's a time and place for annoying things.
Yeah,
it's not a bad thing.
Yeah. And, you know, and then I think much like in the Who Killed Change book, in the very back there's some pages from Cotter where he just talks about. I especially like it's on page 132 in my book, the role of thinking and feeling, where he made some discussion points about those are two different things. One is more about collecting data and analyzing it. One's thinking logically, presenting it logically to change thinking, whereas feeling, it says, feeling differently can change behavior more in capital letters. So again, Cotter's trying to reiterate some of these points, and I think there were some good little insights there. To stick with the penguins theme, just in case you guys are interested, there was an animated movie called The Penguins of Madagascar. It's a Nickelodeon TV show, and they also made it into a full-fledged Hollywood movie. My brother was the writer on that, so if you ever see that movie, at the very end of the movie you'll see written by, he's one of the 3 people who was a co-writer on that movie. So a lot of penguin talk going on in the Abood household, I guess. Okay, let's take a break until 8 o'clock, and then we're going to have our guest speaker. So take a break. Yeah, let's do that.